The news this week revealed the extent of President Putin's ambitions to thwart NATO and dominate Europe. It was reported that Russian agents were linked to an attempted assassination on the Montenegrin Prime Minister. The attempted coup took place on the 16th of October 2016 on election day in the Balkan state of Montenegro. The Russian agents were wearing fake police uniforms and armed with assault rifles were preparing to storm the parliament and assassinate its prime minister. The Montenegrin special prosecutor, Katnic, stated that the intention of the coup was to prevent the nation from joining NATO, and that Putin feels threatened that if Montenegro succeeds in joining NATO, then this would give the Western military alliance control of every port in the northern Mediterranean and Adriatic Sea, from Gibraltar in Spain to the Bosporus in Turkey. Katnic said in an interview on local television, "So far we've had evidence that Russian nationalist structures were behind the plot, but now also that Russian state bodies were involved at a certain level." He went on to say, "The organs of the Russian state must investigate which bodies were involved and open a criminal trial over these acts." The coup was foiled by a tip-off from an informant, and the Montenegrin police rounded up the plotters on polling day that saved the life of Milo Jovanovic, the Prime Minister. This should act as a wake-up call for NATO members and also European nations to reveal the extent of the Russian threat that Russia poses. In recent years, we've witnessed a resurgent Russia under President Putin that invaded the Ukraine through its proxy armed forces, annexed the Crimea in 2014. This has resulted in the death of over 10,000 people and more than 2 million people being displaced from their homes. They have also caused alarm amongst Eastern European states by the large deployment of Russian troops near their borders, thus triggering a NATO military exercises in response, in preparation for a potential invasion of Eastern Europe by Russia. NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. The bulwark of Western defense was established on the 4th of April 1949 as a Western intergovernmental military alliance. If one member of NATO is attacked, this is considered an attack on all members of the alliance. It was also established to protect Europe from Soviet aggression in the Cold War. Russia has, over the past decade, tested Britain's air and sea defences, including in February 2015 by sending 2 nuclear bombers to fly over Devon and Cornwall that had to be escorted away from British airspace by RAF fighter jets. This was one of several deliberate acts of provocation carried out by Moscow, clearly testing the UK's ability to respond to a potential armed conflict with Russia. Last December, the British government acknowledged publicly that Russia is waging a campaign of propaganda and unconventional warfare against Britain, and these involve cyber attacks, fake espionage, and fake news stories. According to a story in the Daily Telegraph, British intelligence officers and senior civil servants across the government expressed their concern about the growing Russian threat during a high-level meeting at the Cabinet Office. The same article discusses how several British MPs have been wooed by the Russians, and it's thought to be higher than any time during the Cold War. Russia is also increasing its propaganda campaign in the UK through state-run news outlets like RT and Sputnik, with the intention of influencing British audiences. This week, the Daily Mail ran a story showing how Russia was trying to influence the Stoke-on-Trent by-election by coming out to support Labour in a series of advertised tweets attacking the UKIP candidate Paul Nuttall. This raises the serious question, what influence does Russia have over some of our political representatives in Parliament? And this poses a direct threat to our democracy. Putin sees Brexit and the rise of right-wing anti-EU nationalist parties across Europe as a means of destroying the European Union and bringing about the downfall of NATO. In an informative article in Time magazine titled "Moscow Advances US Allies to Look Warily to Trump for Clarity," it says that in France, the National Front Party has received €11 million loan from the Kremlin-backed bank in 2014. Their party's leader and presidential candidate, Marine Le Pen, made a campaign pledge this month that she would withdraw France from NATO if she won the presidential election. She's currently leading in the polls, and she could realistically become the next president of France. In Germany, their intelligence agencies have claimed that Russia is involved in orchestrating a propaganda and disinformation campaign to influence the federal elections in September. Stefan Mayer, a member of the Intelligence Committee in the German Parliament, has said that Moscow's plan is to weaken Chancellor Angela Merkel's chances of winning a historic fourth term in office. They're also focusing their efforts in supporting the Alternative Party for Germany, the right-wing Popular Party, who have called for sanctions to be lifted against Russia. If Marine Le Pen wins the French presidential election and Angela Merkel loses the federal election in Germany, then this could lead to the breakup of the European Union. One unforeseen consequence would be that Russia would dominate Europe. This would put Eastern European nations that were liberated from Soviet oppression with the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 back under the sphere of Russian influence and control. Eastern European states are concerned that the new US President Donald Trump might weaken their security in favor of a deal with Russia, as officials in the Trump administration have already participated in talks over the possibility of working closely with Putin in alliance against ISIS and other Islamist terrorist organizations, as well as to reduce proliferation and the stockpile of nuclear weapons and to constrain China. In return, Moscow wants the US to concede Eastern Europe to Russia's sphere of influence. That would include reducing or removing the stockpile of US anti-ballistic missiles in Central and Eastern Europe, the easing of sanctions for their invasion of the Ukraine, and recognition of Russia's claim to the Crimea. President Trump needs to be extremely wary of President Putin's intentions and his desire to see Russia return as a world power, even stronger than before the fall of the Soviet Union in 1989. This week, Mike Pence, the US Vice President, on his first official visit to Europe, delivered a strong message to European nations on their urgent need to increase military spending to secure the future of NATO. The United States currently funds 70% of NATO's budget, and European members are required to pay at least 2% of their gross national product on defence. US Vice President said to European leaders, "The failure to meet NATO spending targets erodes the very foundation of our alliance."
The President of the United States expects our allies to keep their word, to fulfill this commitment, and for most, that means the time has come to do more.
European leaders need to do more to secure the security of Europe by meeting the minimum requirement of NATO membership by spending 2% of GDP on defence. President Trump is sceptical about NATO, and its future could be in doubt if Europe does not take its commitment to the alliance seriously. We all believed that the Cold War ended with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union. But under the leadership of President Putin, Russia has emerged as a malignant force on the world stage. Putin sees the world through the eyes of the Cold War conflict, and therefore it is his ambition to see the collapse of the West, including the United States of America. He is manipulating domestic political elections in Europe to speed up the decline of the European Union and NATO. It is time that our Western leaders realized that our very freedoms are at stake, and those Eastern European countries that have only recently gained their liberty and sovereignty from Soviet oppression could again be subject to Russian control. President Trump needs to accelerate Montenegro's desire to join NATO. Let us remember that it was the United States, together with NATO, that has kept the peace and security in Europe since the end of the Second World War. So let us be wary of the Russian bear, as we could find ourselves embroiled in another world war.